We're wondering how good Washington is, and I was watching the Red Zone, of course, as usual. Heard you there with Chris Rose on the Commanders-Cardinals game, and I wanted to ask you how good you think Washington is, or are they just playing bad defenses right now?
Yeah, Chris Myers. Me and Chris Myers.
My bad. Yeah.
No big deal.
Yeah, different guy.
I always want to give him credit, though. Listen, I think the Commanders are offensively, they're a challenge for anybody. I mean, you put them on tape, and they are running plays that I essentially went to Cliff Kingsbury on Saturday morning going, what do you call this? Like, what is this scheme? Like, how do you – so every time you face them, you're going to get half a dozen scheme runs that you may have never seen before. They're a very unique team built that way, and it's been this amalgamation between Cliff Kingsbury and then Anthony Lynn, the former head coach of the Chargers, the Bills, a former teammate of mine that really understands the run game. They brought him in really to set the mentality and to create schemes off of that kind of air raid offense that Cliff was known for in college and what he tried to do in Arizona. And so they've meshed these two things together. And, you know, and Cliff is the first, like, I love the humility of, like, listen, man, the first time around I didn't have it set. I didn't know what I was doing in the run game, or, you know, I didn't know how to implement some things in the run game. Much too easy, much too spread. Didn't have tight ends that could block people. This go around, you know, it just is changed philosophically for him. So it's a really cool thing to watch and to see him kind of learn from those mistakes. And that's why, you know, I think most coaches that get hired in this league probably have a better opportunity the second time around. You know, Mike Shanahan got hired for the Raiders, got fired, and then was, you know, great in Denver for 14 years. There's so many stories like that of guys who have a better opportunity the second time around. So it's really cool to kind of watch that offense just change from 22 to now in 24.
Hey, Stink, I have a question for you. I've asked my guys here on the station this question before, so I was interested in your opinion because you've been in the offense. If you were to hire a coach, would you rather have a Shanahan guy as a coach or a Shanahan stopper as your coach?
Oh, I think for me, I would rather have a Shanahan guy. I mean, who's the Shanahan stopper?
Well, I'm saying if there was somebody out there that you felt like, you know,
right.
If you had a guy that, you know, a guy in Minnesota, or so, I don't know. I mean, I'm just throwing ideas out there, but the way it is, I think everybody kind of leaning into the Shanahan way, and it's a great way. But I wonder if somebody out there would say, "Give me the Shanahan stopper because I'm playing this more and more now every week."
Yeah, well, it's a great question because there's a huge percentage of teams that's the base or the root of their offense. And of course it becomes tangential depending on like what kind of personnel you have, the people you have, how you see your offense, how much base you want to play versus how much two tight end you want to play versus how much 11 personnel do you want to play. You know, it all is based on kind of the personnel that you have. And so, you know, I would say it's an interesting question. Like if you found somebody that could stop that, but I just don't think all the different kind of levels of that offense. And it's really morphed. There's so much more. You know, if you go back to Shanahan when I was there, like we didn't do very much other than the wide zone stuff. You know, we would have occasional gap run here or there, but for the most part, we're all wide zone stuff and some pin pull stuff, you know, and like G scheme stuff. But other than that, that's kind of all we did. And now you see a very steady mixture of gap runs versus, you know, zone runs. It's almost 50-50 in everybody's offense now. So that's the adaptability of hey, people are playing us a certain way. Now let's get to the gap scheme. And you start making people's play schemes instead of just blocks. And the next thing you know, you're creating gaping, you know, chasms for your running backs and then all the play action stuff that comes after that. So I just know the offense so much better that I would probably choose the offense.
Mark Schlereth is brought to you by Hellman's Real Mayonnaise. You can purchase Hellman's at your local Walmart, Kroger, or grocery store to add extra deliciousness and creamy flavor to your game day dishes this football season, Brian.
And Stink, you were in the Joe Gibbs, the counter tray stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which one? I mean, you guys were devastating in that, and that was run out of a lot of different formations, but the same play. If you had to pick which one to run the ball, would the Gibbs scheme be just as comparable as what the Shanahan scheme was?
Yeah, well, like I said, now it's a mixture of the two schemes. And so, there's so many pros and cons with all the shotgun that you run into now.
Sure.
It becomes very different. I'm a big believer in being under center.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to be under center all the time, but anytime you're out of gun, with near or far, meaning like if it's far, if the back is on the, like if you're in a right-handed formation, like the tight end is right, far would be the running back to the left of the quarterback, near would be the running back to the right of the quarterback in a right-handed formation. And ultimately what ends up happening is you eliminate maybe 30 to 40% of your run game out of gun.
Mm-hmm.
There's just not as much stuff you can run. Now, there are some counter schemes you can run out of that. Then you run basically mid-zone opposite the way the back is, which is a tell for the defense. So you get a lot of slanting, a lot of pinching that way in those type of formations. So, like, I'm a big believer in getting into base. I'm a big believer in getting into two tight ends. I'm a big believer in getting into under center formations.
Sure.
And the other thing about under center formations is, when you run play action, you turn your back to the defense. When you turn your back to the defense as a quarterback, that they can't help but suck themselves up, right? They want to come up, and then you flag that ball. That ball is hidden.
Yeah.
And so it makes it really hard. So you get at least if you don't get the linebacker stepping up, at least you get them to stop their feet, and then they don't get into their drops. And then when you pop back up and you have the ball in your hand, well, now there's wide open spaces to throw the football, and you don't get that same action. You don't get that same reaction in gun. In gun, the backers have a tendency to play, high to low. They're out of their drops, or they'll get into their drops, and then they'll come and attack the run. You don't get that same action on the linebackers and secondary players when you're under center. So again, there's a value to it, and you've got to figure out exactly how much you need and how much you want. And back to Washington, that's one of the things Cliff Kingsbury was basically no under center in Arizona. Now he's getting about 20 to 25 plays a game under center.
I love listening to the inside of talking with Cliff there, because him and Jaden Daniels seem to be on the same page. You see this across the league with these offenses that are working, the play caller putting the quarterback and the offense in a position to succeed. I wonder, watching the Cowboys offense, it kind of seems like we're watching another sport compared to like last night with the Lions and Seahawks. Do you think Mike McCarthy gives the Cowboys an offensive advantage as a play caller at all?
Yeah, they're obviously Mike McCarthy has had a lot of success in this league, and last year they had far more success last year than they've had this year so far. But I think one of the things that you always have to kind of look at is one, how committed you are to running the football and how good you are at running the football.
Mm-hmm.
And in a day and age, when everybody poo-poos the run game and it's a passing league, and you got to overpay wide receivers and you got to do this, that, and the other. And, and that's the narrative that's out there. People don't really understand the value of imposing your will upon people and running the football and attempts. And one of the things I always talk about, when I'm talking to coaches or when I'm talking to people in general, is the attempts become a really big thing to me. And it's really hard for a coach to understand the value of attempts, how it slows down a pass rush, how it creates opportunities in the play action game. And a lot of coaches, if they get a 2-yard gain and a 3-yard gain and then a 2-yard gain and a 1-yard gain, and that's their first 5 runs, they throw their hands up and say, screw it, we're not going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And yet they'll throw 7 incompletions in a row and not even think twice about it. And it just makes no sense to me, because you've got to change your attitude and your mentality. Listen, if you can applaud a 2-yard run, as long as it's physical and you're beating the snot out of people, then you know that eventually it will have, it will pay dividends. But people aren't patient enough to do it in this league. And that's where you get these offenses that are just putrid because they won't commit to it. And I'll go back to Washington against Cincinnati. As good as that offense was in that Cincinnati game, and they were outstanding, do you know that their lead running back averaged 2 yards a carry, and he still got 16 carries?
Yeah.
And then the other running backs got, a handful of carries each. And at the end of the day, with their quarterback and their 2 running backs, and actually 3 running backs, I think they ended up getting like 25 total carries in a game where they're averaging 2 yards a carry. Like that's a commitment to running the game, and you think that had an effect on the play action, you think that had an effect on the ball over the top, you're damn right it did.
Yeah.
So do the quarterback runs. But, like, there's so few coaches that will even they will even do that. They were like, they can't wait to throw their hands up in the air and go, well, we can't run it, so let's throw it on every single possession. And then your offensive line gets trucked, because there's no offensive line that can stand up for 40 pass plays in a row. Sorry, I don't care who you are. Even you go back to the days when the Cowboys were the most dominant group I've ever seen as a starting five. Like, even if you're throwing it 45 times a game and you're not running the ball at all, they won't hold up. It just is impossible.
It's Mark Schlereth here, dropping knowledge with you on your home of the Cowboys. The media is trying to pry with Mike and ask questions. Why not more motion, whether that's Shanahan style or any kind of motion? They're 30th in the NFL. And he won't give us a great answer or like a candid answer, I guess, is kind of what we're looking for, Mark. So I would ask you, why wouldn't a coaching staff like, McCarthy and Schottenheimer together choose to just not run that as much? What are the cons?
Well, it's funny. I coach a little league team with Peyton Manning. And Peyton Manning was pretty good, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Completely static formations. They rarely ever motioned. They rarely ever moved anybody.
Yeah.
It was, we're better than you, and we're going to beat you in these route combinations that we run. So there's a different philosophy. Like, motions and shifts are awesome, and I think they work exceptionally well when your team understands the value of them, and your team is precise. The ball is snapped right where it's supposed to be snapped, so that you have a good leverage position of your tight end who's crossing the formation and is running a lead block or cutting off the backside defensive end or running a lead on the defensive end in combination with another tight end. If that ball is snapped, or if that guy's off time, or if that guy's not in the right position, then you can't block that guy. You can't block that defensive end, and then your play's garbage. And so then it becomes down to how precise are we? What kind of precision do we have? And the other part, of that is, hey, do we have receivers that can't beat one-on-one coverage? Do we have receivers that need to be in motion so they get free releases and all those different things? And so it's a philosophical approach. And I believe in motion. It's like anything. Motion is really good until it screws you up. It's like disguise on defense. Disguise on defense is great until you get out of position and get hit for 80 yards over the top. Then disguise sucks, right? So it depends on how smart your team is, and it depends on what your philosophy is, and is it going to do more harm than good for us? Some teams use it, and they use it to perfection. The Niners are incredible with all the shifts and the motions. But I've also seen, for instance, the Broncos, who have really gotten away from shifts and motions in the last couple of weeks and won 2 games. Their shifts and motions brought other guys into the box, and then the offensive line couldn't sort numbers. And so, your running game, all of a sudden you're running, and let's say you motion a tight end, from a split out formation or like an open formation. So he's off the ball in 5-yard split, and then you motion him back across the formation. Somebody chases across, and all of a sudden you've got an extra defender in the box, and you're running some type of zone inside handoff, and nobody accounts for that guy. And now it's just tackling practice. And so your guys up front have to understand the motions, understand who's coming in the box. Then you have to change the identification of the mic, and you have to say, hey, man, that guy's no longer the mic. Now this guy's going to be the mic, and we've got to switch across the line of scrimmage. Everybody's got to communicate that, and you've got to re-identify that, and you've got to let the widest guy go free or whatever your scheme is. So there's a lot of moving parts, right? And let's say you got a bunch of dumb guys. Well, then motion, and I'm not saying they do, but, if you got a bunch of dumb guys, like, you can't do all that motion. You can't do all those things because they can't sort out the box. They can't get those number counts correct. And the next thing you know, you've got 4 or 5 tackles for losses in your runs, and then you're, behind the 8 ball the entirety of the game, and you ruin 4 drives doing it.